What do you think are the main reasons McKinsey hired you?
That's such a hard question. I actually tried to postpone/drop out of my McKinsey recruiting process. Screw consulting. I'm gonna go do something else. I was networking and meeting with some of these firms as early as when I was 18. You need one person to convince everyone else in the room.
How do you get one of these people to advocate for you?
You're never going to get anywhere by being desperate or begging someone to give you a referral. You need to find an organic way to have someone see your chops and your potential and have them believe in you.
Like you mentioned earlier, some of these organic ways are to
it's kind of a numbers game. Get good at your coffee chat game, get good at your biz riz, build up your resume.
Yeah.
Biggest hack is go on LinkedIn, follow the specific offices, connect with the recruiters at these firms. I probably did minimum 50 cases. Consulting recruiting is a wildly different beast.
Hey Keeners, welcome back to another episode of Jumpstart Your Career with me, your host, Gary Guo. And today we are talking to Langni Zeng. Langni and I met about 2 weeks ago when I saw her literally blowing up on TikTok with her business series and talking about her time at McKinsey as a consultant. So today we are sitting down to have a conversation with her about her entire career journey. More specifically, how did she land a McKinsey internship in her third year summer? It is one of the most coveted, prestigious, and competitive internships in the entire world, and she'll be breaking down the 4 steps that she took to get that internship. And before we get into it, please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. And if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, please scroll up and give me a 5-star rating. It really does help me so much. Hopefully this episode will jumpstart your career, and let's get into it. Langni Zeng, welcome to Jumpstart Your Career.
Thanks for having me. This is so exciting.
To get started, can you tell me a bit about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. I'm Langni. I'm from Toronto. I went to school at Queen's University studying business, did a couple of internships there, and ultimately found my footing in consulting, where I did a summer with McKinsey and then worked there full time for 2 years. Then I left to become a director of strategy and biz ops and really dived into the business AI space. I left that role about 2 months ago now and started pursuing kind of an entrepreneurial sabbatical. One of the couple of side quests I've been working on is content creation.
Yes.
So starting a TikTok was kind of random, but that's how probably a lot of your audience might know me as well. I'm Langni Zeng on TikTok, and I kind of just sit on my couch and yap.
Have you always known that you wanted to go into consulting?
Absolutely not. It's so funny because I remember in high school, one of my friends was really into this TV show called House of Lies, I think, and it was about management consultants. And I remember watching an episode and thinking it was a fake career. I thought it was a comedy concept. I didn't know it was real.
Yeah.
And I didn't know much about the world of business until I showed up on campus at Queen's. And it hits you really, really fast because the first week you get there is Frosh Week. All of these random, really intense student clubs are recruiting for Frosh reps. There's, consulting-oriented clubs, finance-oriented clubs, a bunch of different stuff. And I definitely wasn't prepared for it. I actually had a TA for calculus, and I remember
trauma.
Everyone in my year was like, this girl is so cool. She's so goals because she interned at McKinsey. And I was like, what is McKinsey? But obviously, because everyone said it was so cool, maybe that's just my personality. I was like, okay, this is maybe something I want to do.
You're Googling McKinsey in the background while everyone's like, yeah.
And then I was like, oh my gosh, apparently it's harder to get into than Harvard and all of these things.
Literally. Yeah.
But I remember thinking I actually really respect this girl. I think she's really cool, and naturally joined some of the consulting clubs as part of a student consultancy, joined a international case comp team, and naturally a lot of the students, part of those organizations, go off to work in consulting. Makes it really easy to be plugged in, and that's kind of how it happened.
So the way that I see it is the consulting recruitment process can essentially be broken down into 4 steps. So there is the resume part, networking, case prep, and finally interviews.
I think in my mind, it's even simpler than that. It's just landing the interview and then getting the offer. It's such a marathon, and it's such an intensive process.
What do you mean by it's such a marathon?
I used to think that if you wanted a job, I've been working since I was 15. My perception of getting a job was you saw a job listing, you would apply to it online, go to an interview, and if they liked you and liked your experience based on your resume, you would get hired. Consulting recruiting is a wildly different beast. I was networking and meeting with some of these firms as early as when I was 18 in first year, right? I remember actually going to a networking event where they were serving wine, and I wasn't even of legal drinking age yet. So if you think about it, when I joined McKinsey full time, I was 21, but it was a 3-year process, right? Of learning about the industry, of networking, building up my profile and my experiences before they kind of finally made the investment.
I think it was such a huge reality check for myself. And I think so many other business students when they go into university, first of all, like everybody talks about internships and recruitment because you're already in university. Like what's next, right? Like your career. And you just assume that like these companies will just hire maybe like a week before the job start date and you'll just magically get a job. Like you have your resume and everything. But then you find out that McKinsey and all these other top prestigious firms literally recruit like a year in advance. Yeah. Like what the heck? Like sometimes you're not even like prepared or like you haven't even heard of the firm a year in advance.
Yeah, I will say it's not impossible to land a position if you weren't a tryhard like me. You know, I've heard of people who decided they wanted to do consulting and then maybe just applied, practiced 10 practice cases, ended up getting an offer and starting a couple months later. But I don't know, I think those folks are pretty built different. I couldn't be me.
I want us to maybe just go in order so that we can follow a very, I guess, structured flow when it comes to recruitment, very consulting like. I think the first step when it comes to applying for jobs is always the resume. I know this was a long time ago. I think it was like 4 years ago for you probably at this point. But do you remember the resume that you used to apply to McKinsey?
Yep. So starting off, I had my education, went to Smith School of Business at Queen's, had my GPA. I was close to top 10%, but I wasn't. So Queen's is like a 4.3 scale. I think mine was like 4.05 or something. I had like a couple of case competition outcomes like in my education
like
section.
Awards? Yeah,
awards and achievements, things like that. For work experience, since I was recruiting a full year in advance, so the summer before the actual internship, I had just started my second year summer internship, which I was a customer operations intern at Ritual, which is a Toronto-based like, food ordering startup. Then I had an internship in first year summer as well, which was probably, it's so funny, like my dad and I joke all the time, it's probably one of like the hardest experiences of my life because it was so boring and I was so sad and I really didn't like the job and I was getting paid like minimum wage. But it was for this company based in Markham, Ontario that essentially did like import and export with random like home decor stuff and then they would sell to these retailers.
Okay.
So had that.
Yeah.
Definitely not the sexy brand name internships that you would think McKinsey likes. Then I had my extracurricular experience, which I think is like what really helped me stand out. As I said, I was on CREO, student consultancy. I was on QCCU, had just joined this international case competition team at Queen's. And then I had a couple other extracurriculars as well, but...
So like more extracurriculars than actual work experiences.
Oh, for sure. I mean, I was like, what, 19? Like what kind of work experience do you have? And the other interesting thing is, depending on the extracurricular experience, like these can be way more valuable than a work experience, especially if you're doing an internship where you're treated like an intern and you're giving like a really little scope. Well, there's like kids, for example, like me that like we're literally doing these 4 to 8 month long consulting projects with real clients getting paid real money. And it was like I learned more and got more experience from that one extracurricular than I did from it's probably like the average of like 2 courses worth of workload.
You're telling me about these extracurricular experiences and I don't know if you've seen it recently, but because it is Frosh Week, I think a few weeks ago, a lot of people on the internet are talking about these really top prestigious student clubs and how getting into one of these clubs is like getting into the CIA.
I swear to God, some of these clubs and organizations are harder to get into than the college itself. Am I applying to the CIA or a student-run organization? Because why am I filling out a personal statement and then going through 2 rounds of interviews? Dude, I bet NASA isn't this competitive.
Literally.
Rounds upon rounds of interviews. It's really intense. It's like more intense than like actual like job interviews. What do you think is the reason why people, you know, are so desperately trying to get into these top clubs?
I will answer a question, but I have a really hot take. I hate Frosh hiring with a passion. I think it's one, not the most equitable process. Who knows anything first week of first year, right? It's completely based on your previous experiences, what high school you went to, what your parents did, all of those things, your existing relationships. And the second thing is, it's also really hard for the actual clubs to find the best people because they've been on campus for 3 days and all 3 days was like partying, right? So obviously you can try and look at their experience, but it's high school. So you don't have enough data points to actually figure it out. I tried Frosh Rep recruiting. I actually didn't land a single position.
Oh.
Yeah. No. So to answer your real question though, why are people so desperate for it? It's like, do you want to be a Nepo baby or do you want to figure it out yourself? You know, when you get onto a club like this, granted, it's so competitive, but it's an advantage. So many of these student groups have alumni in the places that you want to go to. You get a lot of like coaching and mentorship. Another really important thing is you get community. There's no way I would have survived the marathon of consulting recruiting on my own. It's funny, we were just talking about this. We're in like right now, and the last time I was here was when I was going through consulting recruiting, and all of my friends from Creo, QCCU that were also going through this process, they all lived here, and this is where I did like the majority of my mock cases and everything like that.
That is so crazy. Being a part of one of these prestigious student clubs is like turning into a Nepo baby. Like you get so much more access to resources. Like personally being a part of the Ramen Commerce case competition team, it is so useful because if you really want it, you can get an interview. Like these alumni will help you and they will give you the resources to network, to give you an referral to the recruiters. And that is just not available to the rest of the student population who don't have these networks and connections. Obviously, you can still get into consulting or other industries without being a part of these clubs, but would you recommend every high achieving university student join one of these clubs?
No, I think I'm very careful with what I recommend, and it sounds so consultanty of me, but it so depends on who you are. Do what feels right for you and what your priorities are. I don't think I regret any of my experiences, but there's always trade-offs, right? I spent a lot of my free time in college doing work for these clubs, and it's almost like a part-time job.
Unpaid,
exactly. Or you get paid in like going to a restaurant once a year. So I think it depends. I think it's a really great experience and really great resources and support if you think you want to pursue a career. You don't join these clubs trying to use it to help you land a job. You join these clubs for a taste of what the real job might look like to inform whether or not you even want to do it.
Yeah. Wow. Oh my God, that is like so much better and so much more politically correct and like open-minded than I think a lot of people think.
So I remember when I was in first year, so many people just showed up to campus Fresh Week and they were like, I'm going to be an investment banking analyst at Goldman Sachs or something like that. And I remember being like, how do you know? Or like, how would you know? Right? Because these decisions you make are informed by all the life experiences that you've had. And when you're 18, in my opinion, like, sure, it's good to have a hypothesis or a goal, but you have to be open-minded enough to realize like, maybe the more you learn about this, like it's not the right fit.
Yeah. In your second year summer, you worked at this startup called Ritual that's based in Toronto. At the time, you were very insecure about it because it is not the traditional second year internship that a lot of successful candidates who have gotten MBA did in second year. Usually it's like, oh, they did like a big 4 consulting internships or they worked at a big bank. Like, can you take us back to maybe how you felt at the time? And maybe like, do you still feel insecure about that experience now? And like, what really shifted?
Oh my gosh. Second year summer recruiting was so hard. I literally landed this Ritual summer internship, I think in April.
That's so late.
Right. So all of my friends had these jobs from the fall, working at like a big 4 firm or like at a bank, or at least like some type of traditionally, successful role. And I had probably applied to, I don't know if I had to guess, like 80 to 100 internships, had done a couple interviews, and I just kept like flopping. And I was like, what is wrong with me? Like, why can't I get a job? And just honestly, such a blessing. I had sent a cold email out to just someone at Ritual. They brought me in for one interview and decided to like give me the job.
Were they even hiring at the time?
I think they had internship openings, but I don't think they were actually specifically hiring from Queens. I think maybe they had like a co-op posting with Ryerson. I actually have no idea. It was literally from a cold email.
It must have been a really tough experience, like mentally and just like thinking about like the upcoming recruitment cycle. And, like, going into it.
However, it's so funny because I always say things happen for a reason. I probably had the best summer out of any of my friends. I loved working at Ritual. It was so much fun. That year, they were growing really fast, expanding to, I think, like 8 different countries. Working in a tech startup environment is, I think, a great fit for me. You go in, everyone's pretty casual. You're working on things that you feel like are important because there's less like corporate bureaucracy. I think the company only had about 400 people at the time. I I went out for drinks with my coworkers. I felt like I was friends with them, whereas a lot of my friends in these like more traditional corporate roles felt like they weren't working on things that maybe were as meaningful. You know, it was very, I guess, like what you would expect out of corporate America.
Yeah.
And I think like pretty soon into the internship, I actually realized this was such a blessing in disguise, because since it was a startup and way less structured, there was way more opportunity for me to be entrepreneurial and work on something actually meaty and important, as opposed to working on like a traditional like intern project in a really large corporation. And that definitely made me stand out in recruiting.
Yeah. And I think like that's what a lot of consulting companies want, right? Like they want you to take charge and lead a vertical or whatever they call it.
So consulting companies care about personal impact, problem solving abilities. They care about your entrepreneurial spirit. And sure, having a brand name probably helps, but I think increasingly they're actually pretty interested in folks with less traditional backgrounds. So I remember there was one McKinsey BA who was a year above me that was also from Queens. He did like an internship at Shopify. So he kind of started like the tech startup to consultant pipeline. There were people I think that landed MBB internships from being like a director at a summer camp the year before, or working in politics. Like,
I think a lot of people believe that if you want to land an S tier internship in your third year summer, S tier meaning MBB consulting or high finance, you have to follow a very set path. It's kind of like a linear progression where, for example, you get a good first year internship and then a even better one, maybe at a big 4 consulting or a big 5 banking one in second year summer. And then you move up the ladder. And by third year, you get a really good internship. And it's like this pathway that you have to follow. Do you think that's necessarily true?
no, I actually super disagree with it. Your third year internship is not the end goal, you know? Like, it's so silly to think of it as this like S tier goal that you prioritize and design your whole life around to get there. You're 20 years old, right? Every single internship is just a new learning opportunity for you to help inform what you want to do, to help prepare you for whatever big thing you want to do in the long term. So I think, one, don't hyperfixate on the I have to land an S tier internship, because, you know, it's not for everyone.
Also, the S tier name sounds so ridiculous.
Yeah, it's like cringe.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
ultimately, I think what the S tier internship thing kind of translates to is like being in a really great like internship experience where you are really supported, like you learn a lot. It's a really great development opportunity. It opens up more doors for the future, but you can kind of replicate that anywhere, right? Maybe you could do something entrepreneurial and try and start your own business. Maybe you can work at a less well-known place, but have really big personal impact. If I was in first year, I'd never say like, okay, I need to get an internship at McKinsey. These are the steps I need to do. Like, no, follow your heart sounds cheesy, but have a hypothesis on what you want to do. Be like, okay, I'm interested in strategy, try and apply for these roles, or I'm interested in tech, apply for these. I would literally just solve for the next step and not do the whole like 5, 10, whatever your plan.
And I think one of the ways to do that is through networking and maybe talking to people
For sure.
in different industries.
For sure. I'm someone who has always followed people. The reason I ended up on Crow and QCCA was because the upper years that I knew, some of them were in finance, some of them were in consulting, some of them were in marketing. The ones that I thought I wanted to be most like, either personality-wise or lifestyle-wise or, you know, values-wise, were in consulting. So it's like, okay, like, I think these are my people. This is like the club I'm going to join. It's funny because in fourth year, I joined this club called QTMA, Queen's Tech and Media Association. One of the best extracurricular experiences I ever had. I actually left the case competition team in fourth year to do that instead. And that's because I started meeting all these people in tech after my internship experience and was like, oh, I actually want to build. I want to do startup life. And then kind of followed those people into the QTMA club.
Yeah, and you're in tech now. So I think it definitely helps so much. Back in those days when you were recruiting, how did you approach networking for consulting?
It was kind of just go with the flow, because the wave that you get caught on from being in these like target schools and target clubs is like for example, you get invitations to maybe more exclusive events. Like you kind of already know these people. One thing I did in college in second year that I think really helped me was this case competition called Q3C. Queens runs it, but there's a bunch of students go, and my team won, and then I also won like most valuable delegate from that competition.
That girl, it girl.
Which was crazy. I don't think anyone, I didn't expect that. It's so funny because I think back on it and I was like, I almost didn't go because like I paid for most of school myself, and I also had to pay for these conferences myself, and that comp was like $200. So I was like scrambling money, like trying to do these side jobs, get $200 to go. And then I won an Apple Watch from this, like getting most valuable delegate. Immediately posted it on Kijiji, sold it for like $300 something. And I was like, yes, I'm positive ROI. But that's besides the point. After I won Q3C, all of these reps from these different firms, I think kind of like knew who I was.
Talent.
Yeah, literally, which is so silly because like it's a 1 week long case comp. But then for example, like it was easier to kind of like get coffee with them or to do like a Zoom. So yeah, I just started like going to the events on campus, trying to build these one-on-one relationships. But I never had an Excel spreadsheet with a list of everyone's names, firms, notes. Like that's just not really my style. I think I always approach things a little bit more organically. And I'm so bad at following up sometimes. Like let's say I got coffee with someone 5 years ago, never followed up again. Like
the people who do that are like a little bit scary to me. I'm like, wow, it's so like, I don't know, maybe it's like genuine, but sometimes it feels a bit calculated. It's like they have like reminders on calendars for themselves. Oh, it's been 3 months, time to send like a follow-up message or something like that. It's crazy.
I respect it. It's very type A. I just can't do it.
Speaking of like case competitions, I think it's like the most underrated way to break into consulting or just like learn more about your career interests in general. I think we're a bit biased because we're both on the case competition team at our respective schools, but do you think that every single business student should do at least one case competition during undergrad?
Yeah, I think everyone should do everything at least once, you know? But I think like the case competition piece, it's interesting. I think the value you get from it is the doing a case study, acting like a consultant, thinking about corporate strategy, things like that, which lends itself pretty naturally to the content of work that you do in consulting. However, I will say that case competition experience isn't a work experience you talk about in interviews.
That's
so
true.
when I was recruiting for consulting or any of these jobs, like obviously these recruiters and hiring managers probably thought it was impressive and cared that I was on these clubs, but it wasn't like I talked about it because a case comp is like 1 week long max, which just isn't like a big or juicy enough experience. It's not like you have to do it and it's going to be like the perfect extracurricular experience. Like that's not the case. But again, like you don't do the case comp for this firm to hire you. You do it to figure out if you enjoy it or not.
And like speaking of like just like networking and case competitions in general, a lot of students don't know about this, but there's a lot of diversity events and challenges that a lot of consulting firms like MBB run. For instance, McKinsey there's a case competition every year called the McKinsey Challenge. I think it's by invite or by application basis. But I've heard that these students who do go, they're pretty much already screened. And if they do well in the case competition, then they can really get close to the recruiter. And they'll pretty much be like, I wouldn't say guaranteed, but like they have a much higher chance of getting an interview.
For sure. I was part of the McKinsey Challenge team for a year on the like firm side of things. And you can think of it from McKinsey's point of view, which is just that it's an investment in recruiting. It's one way for them to identify top candidates without having to screen through like 10,000 resumes, right? I think it's an awesome thing to do. It's free. It is application on an application basis, but I think it's objectively easier to get invited to McKinsey Challenge than it is to like be hired as a summer intern, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So it's a fun weekend in Toronto. You get to see the office sometimes. You get to meet a lot of people. It's just another data point.
I think they do it every, March or somewhere in that time frame. So I think like a lot of these firms have these like specific good recruitment events for like networking purposes or just for like experiences. So definitely go check them out.
Biggest hack is go on LinkedIn, follow like the specific offices, connect with the recruiters at these firms, even like send them an email. Sometimes it's almost like an email newsletter or whatever, like make sure they have your email so that when you go on LinkedIn, you can see when people are posting about these events. Maybe it'll be on your campus career or job portal, whatever, if you go to a target school. Another really underrated thing is like follow McKinsey or whatever firm like on Instagram because these firms are not popular on Instagram.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Like, I don't know, but they post about these things. And as someone who's like on Instagram more than I am on LinkedIn, it's a great way to find out about it.
I think there's such a huge information gap sometimes. It's like people hear about these opportunities and they're like, wait, like I didn't hear about it when it happened and now FOMO, like major FOMO. Like like Lonnie said, follow these firms on Instagram. I think it's also just good to like familiarize yourself with like the culture and everything.
If you want to keep an eye open or an ear open for these opportunities, like you just kind of have to be into it. Like let's say you're a sneakerhead and you're waiting for like the next sneaker drop. Like it's obviously something you care about and you research and you go out. Like these really cool opportunities won't just magically be brought to your face all the time.
I know like personally you're not very type A, but I kind of want to ask this question anyways because I've heard that there's 3 types of people that you should network with when it comes to consulting recruitment. Obviously, first we have the recruiter who has the ultimate power in this process to give you an interview. But then you also have these recruitment captains or the people on the recruitment team that's dedicated for your school because they also are in close contact with the recruiter. And these are the people who actually have a lot of power in the process. And then the third one is alumni from your school, if you have any. Would you agree with like this 3-pronged networking strategy?
That's so consultant of you. Yes and no. To simplify it, all you need is to get an interview. And to get an interview, you need one person to convince everyone else in the room that you should get an interview. For some people, that's the recruiter. For some people, that's an alumni that's currently like on the recruiting team there. For some people, that's like a partner. You essentially just need like someone in the firm to be like, Gary is an absolute weapon. He would be so good. He needs to get an interview. And convince the recruiting manager or whoever. Here's the thing. If you have like a garbage resume with like no experiences, like I don't know if anyone could kind of help you, but having like someone's informal referral like definitely helps.
But then how do you approach that process? You know, like how do you get one of these people to advocate for you? Really
I think you have to do it organically. I don't know who advocated for me. I actually don't know how I got an interview, but like I have a guess. And I bet you anyone who pulled for me wasn't someone that I like cold reached out to on LinkedIn. It was someone that like I had a substantial relationship with. So for example, maybe it was an alumni that I was on like Creo or QCCU with that was currently at the firm. Maybe it was like a judge at one of these case competitions, you know? You're never going to get anywhere by like being desperate or like begging someone to give you a referral. You need to like find an organic way to have someone see your chops and your potential and have them believe in you.
Yes. And like you mentioned earlier, some of these organic ways are to do case competitions, attend firm events, or just like any other thing to like be physically in a room with someone else and like meet them like that instead of like a random calculated, perfected LinkedIn message.
There's so many events like webinars and Zooms. I was on a ton of them when I did recruiting at McKinsey. The other thing I'd say is if you are someone that needs to get in contact with like a recruiting manager or someone, try and get a warm lead. I have done probably like over 100 coffee chats with different students and young professionals looking to get into consulting. If I have a really, really good chat with someone and I can kind of see their potential, I'll offer like, hey, like I'm actually going to personally connect you with someone I know at this firm, and I'll like set it up for them. Granted, I wouldn't necessarily ask for that if I was like the student doing the coffee chat, because it's kind of based on the discretion of the mutual connection you have. But I would say like it's kind of a numbers game. Like get good at your coffee chat game, get good at your biz riz, build up your resume, be a really good candidate. If they see potential and talent in you, they'll naturally invest in you and help you figure out how to navigate the process.
For sure. So maybe like diving deeper into your recruitment journey, the next step is naturally case prep, which is, I guess, like a very unique aspect of consulting recruitment because not every firm asks you to do that. And I remember the first time I did it, it was like so weird and so unnatural. And I was like, what is going on? Like, this is so confusing. How did you approach case prep back then?
I'll be structured here. Step 1, you need someone that is a friend who is also going through the process. You do probably 10 cases with this friend and it's like blind leading the blind. You have no idea what you're doing. You barely know what a case interview is. For me, that was one of my best friends, Rachel from Queens. Literally, shout out Rachel. It's so funny. We joke about it all the time. Like we had no idea what a case interview was. And we would just give each other these mock cases from these random books that we found. And they were horrible. But the point of the first 10 is just to actually figure out what a case interview is so that when you actually start practicing, you can be structured about it. For example, like I grew up competitive figure skating. You're not going to learn how to do a triple axel before you know how to skate forwards and backwards. And you just need to like fumble a couple times. After you get that out of the way with someone that you are like close to and like feel really safe with, then you start building kind of a network of other students or other young professionals going through a similar process. So that way you can practice with a bunch of different people, get different types of feedback to help you improve your game. When you're getting to a point where you're like, all right, I feel pretty good about this, that's when you start asking maybe like previous interns or alumni or upper years to help you. Because at this point, it's not mutual. Like you're not giving them a case back. They're like specifically coaching you. And it's hard to get access to coaching because it requires someone to give up their time. So these are mentors that hopefully you've collected along the way, upper years that go to your school. That's kind of where you go. And then the last step is to go to the alumni. And I would say I had a really, really great mentor of mine that I had met through one of these clubs. I think he had left the firm at the time already, but I think he was like left at engagement manager level. I did probably 1 or 2 cases with him, and it was just like more helpful than maybe like 10 cases with peers that I had done before, because it's like a seasoned vet giving you advice. So that's how I would do it. I probably did like minimum 50 cases, which sounds like a lot. I've had friends at McKinsey who said like, oh, I did 5. And I was like, good for you. Like
500 or 5?
5.
Oh,
5.
I was like, that could mean 5 or 500.
No, they were like, I did 5. And I was like I didn't even know what a profit tree at like case number 5 was, So it really depends on the person, but that's like a structured playbook. If you are confident in your abilities, I'd go straight to like, you can skip the, maybe first few steps.
And I guess like after case prep comes the actual interview. So at this point, you've already, submitted your resume, you've got the interview. What did your interview process look like for McKinsey?
This was like quite a few years ago now, so it's actually changed. I recruited for McKinsey, Bain, BCG. They were pretty much all the same process. There's the first round, which is usually with like an associate or an engagement manager level person at all 3 firms. If you're successful, then you hear back and then you do like a final round with a couple more cases with partners and leadership at these firms.
And like, what was your mindset going into recruiting for McKinsey?
Oh man, it was so ups and downs. Honestly, I didn't know anything. Like, you don't know much besides like what people talk about. And McKinsey had a reputation of being like, they only took like the gold medalist of every year, like the smartest person, the president of these highly competitive clubs. And I was like, ooh, I don't think I'm like McKinsey material. Like maybe like Bain will be fun. Like Bain seems like still a good company that maybe has like good culture or whatever. But my mindset was like, recruiting is an awful experience. I will take the first offer I get and then like I'm out of there. Got final rounds for Bain, didn't get the offer. Got final rounds for BCG, didn't get the offer. So it was very ups and downs. And it was like, McKinsey was like the last cycle that I did. And at the time, there was this myth that I had believed where if you didn't have a competing offer, there was no way you could get an offer at McKinsey. So I actually tried to like postpone / drop out of my McKinsey recruiting process. I was like, screw consulting. I'm going to go do something else. Like I was also working full time at my second year summer startup. And I'd missed so much work, the doctor's appointment stuff, trying to do these interviews. And I was like, I can't waste another day. Thankfully, this magical woman that has helped me so much in my career, who was the recruiting manager at McKinsey at the time, actually gave me a call. Or I think she told my interview buddy to give me a call and to convince me to just do it. And like, obviously, like it didn't guarantee if I was going to get an offer or not. But the thing that changed in my mindset was literally like, I'm going into this not thinking I'm going to get a job out of it. So what does that mean? I get 4 interviews with 4 different partners at McKinsey who in any other world would charge me thousands of dollars an hour to speak to me. So I'm just going to learn from them for free, and I'll get to meet these people. I'll hopefully osmosis some brain cells and it'll be fun and I won't get an offer, but that's okay. And that mindset, this is literally just like consumer surplus. It's like free time. That mindset really helped me, I think, like feel a little bit more natural, like feel less pressure and all of that. And ultimately like ended up in me getting an offer, which was so insane. I actually got my offer, like I got a verbal offer on the spot, like following my last interview. So that was actually really exciting to like be in the room. And it was with one of the most senior people at in the Toronto office at the time. And he was just like, well, like, welcome to the firm or something like that. And I was like, no way.
Yeah, that's so crazy. I guess like I won't dive into too much detail about the McKinsey recruitment process, but were there any like really fun moments or unexpected questions that you got in that process?
I think it's such a like personal experience getting to meet a lot of these really impressive leaders across like all of the firms. Because you realize they all have these really interesting experiences and you kind of bond over different things. I will say there were interviews I had that were like far less traditional than I thought. Like there were definitely some folks who clearly didn't use one of those like case interview guidelines with a rubric and kind of just tested the different
Deviated
components.
from the script.
Exactly, deviated from the script and tested the same, maybe skills, but in a more organic way. One of the interviews that I loved to do was like, I didn't really do a case with this interviewer. My guess is he was kind of just trying to like tell me about what he was working on and see how I approached the different questions. So we pretty much did like 3 different cases in one, each with like a different question. So one of them was something about like, how would you figure out how many pianos there are in the UK? But it wasn't like a traditional market sizing question. It was literally like a brainstorming question being like, what are all the different mechanisms or like ways you could figure this out? So, looking into sales data, interviewing people, all of this stuff. And we just went on and on and on. And he kept being like, come up with another idea, come up with another idea. And I was like getting so stumped. And at the end, I was like, I know this is like an ethical issue. So I'm not saying it's a good idea. We would have to really think about the privacy considerations of this. But maybe we could tap into all the smart devices in the UK, like the Google Homes, the phones, whatever, and triangulate based on piano sounds they heard to figure out how many pianos there were.
Yeah.
And he was like, okay, that was a really creative answer. We can move on now. So I think like they're just trying to see if you're a good problem solver and if you can demonstrate like analytical thinking, if you can demonstrate brainstorming, if you can structure your communications.
Outside the box thinking.
Exactly. But that one I was definitely like, I have no idea where this is going. First we were talking about, an airplane, and then we were talking about pianos, and he was kind of just going his way. My guess though, I will say, is I think they've become a little bit more buttoned up since I went through recruiting. I believe the recruiting teams have tried to not discipline, but encourage these interviewers to be a little bit more by the book.
Interesting. I think you're also telling me about how you guys were literally like role playing in that interview or something.
So interesting. I mean, every case interview is a role play, right?
Technically, yes.
But there was one point where in that piano interview, he was saying, imagine I'm a factory manager and I produce like airplane bodies for you, but I'm trying to steal your IP and we have a really bad relationship. Like, let's role play this conversation. So then I obviously was like, oh, well, if I were, and he's like, no, we're going to role play. And I guess he maybe just wanted to see how I would perform under pressure or handle like a difficult conversation. But that was super out of the box too. If you prepare for a consulting interview or you prepare for any type of interview, even if it goes a little off script, you're still okay. And you hopefully will have the, practice and muscles to be able to play it through.
I guess we already talked about this a little bit earlier, but how did you feel when you got the offer from McKinsey?
It was such a relief, which I don't know if that's a sad thing to say. You would expect that you would be so excited and want to celebrate and all this, which don't get me wrong, like I got there eventually, but I remember when I walked out of the office after just hearing that I got this offer, it was so surreal. And I remember the first thing I did was call my parents because I had to. I wanted them to know. They were so supportive throughout the whole process, and it was something I was so stressed about. They obviously were very stressed for me as well because they wanted the best. So I let them know. I contacted a very few couple of people, but mostly the people that helped me through this process because I think they were the ones that deserved to know first. I didn't even tell too many of my friends. I went straight home and just went to bed. I just took a nap and I was like, I just felt this sense of relief and I was like, all right, I'm going to take a nap and deal with this later. And then I woke up from my nap and apparently the whole world knew. Like, I feel like because, like whether it's the students or the current consultants at these firms or the alumni, they all talk and they all find out.
It's a very small circle.
Such a small circle.
Yeah.
So I woke up to, a lot of really kind messages from people, but it was like a little overwhelming because people are really positive and supportive, but at the same time, like everyone's talking about it when you get a final round, and then everyone's talking about it when you don't get the offer.
Oh, that's
and
so rough.
I didn't want to be perceived, but obviously like that's what was happening. So yeah, that's kind of how I felt.
It's funny because that's going to be you after this podcast comes out.
I think I've realized through content creation that, I don't know, like you're always going to have people who are a fan of you and people who won't like you, and that's totally okay. Like this world is a really diverse place. But I think like if people are going out of their way to criticize you or in an unconstructive way, like hate on you, it's a leading indicator of success. People love to hate.
Yeah. Haters gonna hate. Maybe this is my most important question that I want to ask you today. But what do you think are the main reasons McKinsey hired you out of all these thousands of applicants?
That's such a hard question. So I think one, I had a profile that was pretty fit for it because of my extracurricular involvement, the case competition I did, the relationships I already had. It was pretty natural to be like, okay, this is probably someone we would interview. And then also I think I had just done so many cases that I think I was at a point where I was pretty good at cases. Regardless of whether or not you get the offer, if you're consistently making it to final rounds, it usually means like you've got the case interview part down pat. I remember one piece of feedback that I got from my last interviewer at McKinsey. He was saying how there are so many really high performing, really smart people that come in, and one thing they care about is, I guess, like the energy you bring into a room. Like, are you someone that's super sharp, but also really collaborative that people would have fun and feel comfortable working with for really long hours? Because that's what the job is. And I think to this day, it's probably the best positive piece of feedback I've ever gotten. But he said, like, the way that I engage in problem solving, like, puts energy into a room. And I was like, you think I'm like a culture hire? Like
personality hire?
Literally, and like bring like the positive vibes. But it's such a thing. Like this can be a stressful job. Interviews are a stressful environment. If you can go in, be positive, keep it lighthearted, make jokes, I think like people actually do respond to that. And that's what he had told me. I would say like lastly, there's such a big component of luck to it. There's such a big component of luck. There's way more people that are qualified for the role that actually land it. So I was lucky to get an interview. I was lucky to, get matched up with the interviewers that I did. Sometimes you have an off day, sometimes you have a good day. I was lucky that the economy was maybe good at the time, so they had capacity to hire a little bit more. It's all like momentum that builds up onto each other.
Yeah. Sometimes I think like I make these videos because I want to give like very specific, like, oh, like 1, 2, 3, you need to do this, that, and that. You need to think of this, you need to do these things. Yeah. But then it's like, sometimes I think these things are kind of like fate almost. And it's like, you are such a unique individual person and you have your own path. And it's like, yes, there are like tips and inspiration and other things, but at the end of the day, you got the job because you're you, not because you did X, Y, Z. It's like, it's so important to think of it like that.
100%. I think it's so easy to try and do pattern recognition, like this person got this job because this is what they did. But the best thing you can do is try to get as close to your personal potential as you can. So for example, like if you are so passionate about content creation, go start a channel and blow it up. You know what I mean? If someone's so passionate about the sport, go to the Olympics and do that. Like that's what these places often care about, not like how well could you replicate this recipe of joining this club, doing this internship, whatever.
Okay, that is it of our conversation with Langni Zeng about her internship recruitment journey at McKinsey. Hopefully you really enjoyed this episode and you've learned something that you can use for yourself when it comes to recruiting for consulting companies or just navigating your career in general. As always, feel free to hit that subscribe button or follow this podcast anywhere you listen or watch on. Stay tuned for next week's episode where we continue our conversation with Langni about her career in consulting post-grad. So we'll talk about, what do consultants actually do? What are the exit opportunities available, and just general valuable life lessons. So stay tuned for that. Keeners, I'll see you next week.